All right, so this will be the second of 4 videos for this chapter. I'm trying to make shorter videos. Hopefully that's helpful for you. In this video, we're going to go through the needs theories in the book. So this is really, if we were using a typical HR textbook, this is sort of what the meat of this chapter would be. So this is really what your quiz is going to be mostly about too, are these motivational theories. Excuse me. So we have different kinds of theories that this textbook goes over. The first ones are content or needs theories. We generally just call them needs theories. That might be helpful for you in your notes. And what we're focusing on is what motivates people to do what they're doing at work. These were earlier theories. That's why they're kind of the first ones we introduced in this chapter. And what I'm doing in the slides is I looked up the years that these theories were introduced in literature, either in journal articles or in a book. And that will help you kind of understand how we evolved all of these theories from needs theories to the second group, which is process theories. And these are theories about how motivation operates. So instead of identifying what motivates people, they're trying to figure out what is the process in someone's sort of head that's going on that gets them motivated at work. And then we also have some non-cognitive theories. They weren't necessarily in this order. A lot of them were built or developed when the needs theories were kind of big in the psychological literature, but they're looking more at environmental influences. So instead of thinking about what's going on in someone's head, like the process theories are doing, my cat has joined us again. What they're doing is they're looking at what's outside of that person that could be influencing them and helping them get motivated to do something at work. So, kind of the most famous needs theory, and the one you've probably heard the most about, is what we call Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This was introduced in 1943. So, this is a lot of this research starts post World War II, where we're starting to get more workers in the workplace. We have more people, in factories, in offices, and supervisors and other leaders are trying to figure out how do we motivate these people to do good work, especially because I think at this point, we've kind of realized you can't control everyone at work because if you do, they'll be unmotivated. They might not be more productive. So you have to figure out how do we get people to be motivated at work on their own without having to reward them, every single time they do exactly what we want, but also without having to sort of supervise them very closely all the time either. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I put a picture here. It's usually depicted as a pyramid with the bottom. You start at the bottom and you work your way to the top. So the bottom needs are physiological needs. So these are things like food, water. A lot of it's like bodily functions and that sort of thing. Usually for work or compensation benefits classes, we don't focus on these kind of bottom needs because we're assuming they're fulfilled if you have employment. The next level up is safety needs, so protection, stability, and well-being, health, and financial security. This might be something of concern for supervisors. This is definitely a concern for employees, say when there's layoffs, for example, because you don't feel protected or stable in your employment potentially. These are kind of where we start being concerned about them in terms of compensation and benefits. The next level is love and belonging. So friendships, family, social groups, community, intimacy, having a good relationship with your supervisor, with your colleagues, enjoying the customers that you might work with or the clients you work with, that sort of thing. The next step up is esteem needs. These are self-confidence and independence, respect and acknowledgement from others. These are the kinds of needs that are related to things like meaning and significance at work. So a lot of you probably chose the majors that you did based on kind of more of esteem needs, things that you can master, things that you find meaningful, things that you think will be challenging and interesting and that you're curious about in your work. Theoretically, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, once all of these bottom level needs are met, you can become self-actualized. And being self-actualized is the desire to accomplish everything that one can and to become the most that one can be. There's some debate in the literature of what this looks like. It's not clear that people can identify when they're self-actualized or when others can identify that someone else is self-actualized. It's not even clear that you can stay in a state of self-actualization. You could fall back down the pyramid even if you'd been self-actualized at some point, but theoretically, this is sort of the goal of these needs. So the key insight here is higher order needs become motivators as lower needs are satisfied. So in this theory, theoretically, you have to meet the lower level needs for people to move up in that pyramid. But the criticisms are that these needs may not be in this order for everyone. And in fact, you can often have needs in different categories at the same time. So for example, you might be in a job that you find really challenging and interesting that's meeting your esteem needs, but maybe there are layoffs in your company, in which case you might have some safety needs issues going on. It doesn't mean that suddenly you have no esteem needs. You still have the esteem needs that you had before, where you want to have meaningful work or you want to find significance in the work you do, but you also now have this other safety need that's coming up that you're worried that you might get laid off or that your colleagues that you work with might get laid off. There's also very little research that supports this theory. This is kind of the simplest needs theory that we learn about, and it's not very useful because it's almost too simple in talking about how the world works. So in 1961, so almost 20 years later, we have another theory called McClellan's need theory. And this theory talks about needs being learned through your life experience. So, if you grew up very poor, for example, what needs you have for work might be very different from someone who maybe grew up in a middle class household or even a wealthy household where they weren't worried so much about making money from work, but more finding interesting work in their lives. Um, so we have different kinds of needs. I tried to make a picture with AI because I couldn't find a good free, copyright-free image on the internet of this need theory. But there's three needs with McClellan's need theory. The first is achievement, and if you ever see anyone who does work with this theory, this will be written out as ACH. They abbreviate all the needs. I don't know why. So this is the need to achieve, to meet your goals, to master some either content or a process or a skill, something like that. The second need is affiliation. It would be AFF. This is your need to be with other people, to have relationships, that sort of thing. And then there's also a need for power. And our book distinguishes between two kinds of power, personal power and institutional power. Personal power would be like the ability to influence other people. So some people actually have a lot of this, even in informal relationships. And then there's also institutional power, having status or like a title that gives you power over other people. Power doesn't include just having power over other people. It sometimes also includes like having information that other people don't have. With this one, we have all of these needs, but your life experience will determine which of these needs dominate. So usually in this theory, there's one that dominates in someone's life. And so the supervisor's job is to figure out which one dominates for an employee. But the key insight here is that needs can be developed through training and experience. So we can train employees to have a stronger need for something. So here's a good example. If you work in a very collegial environment, you might actually increase people's need for affiliation, or you might fulfill that need for affiliation depending on how people's relationships are. And that can be something that you can influence as a supervisor, but also the organizational culture itself can influence within its employees. But there are several criticisms for this theory. Again, it's pretty early on in all of these theories. One, it has a less practical application than other motivation theories, especially because it says that one of these needs dominates, but that makes it difficult for supervisors sometimes to determine what that need is. And even if they do, how do you deal with that in terms of compensation and benefits for employees? It also has limited predictive ability. Even if you knew what someone's dominant need was, that may not help you determine what they're going to do should you give them a certain kind of reward, for example. Another needs theory that you will get confused with the McClellan's need theory is what we call Alderfer's ERG theory. This comes out much later in the 60s, so almost 1969, so about 8 years later. This modifies Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The previous one, McClellan's, doesn't necessarily deal with Maslow's hierarchy of needs directly, but it is a needs theory in the sense that there are needs that people have that they're trying to fulfill through different aspects of life. And here we're talking about work. In this particular theory, and I found this graphic and I thought it was really good because it's showing Maslow's hierarchy of needs on the left, but on the right are the ERG, and ERG are the three needs for this theory, so that makes it helpful. And here you have existence needs, so having food, having protection, having a house over your head, that sort of thing. Those are kind of our most basic needs in this theory. But then once those needs, we have some of those needs, we also have relatedness needs where we need to have relationships with other people. In the workplace, this is with your colleagues, with your supervisor, with other people that you work with. And then people also have growth needs, which is associated with more of the esteem needs and the self-actualization as part of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And these are needs like having challenging work, being interested in what you're doing, being curious about what the work that you're doing, that sort of thing. In ERG theory, unlike Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you do not have to fulfill like existence needs before you have relatedness needs before you have growth needs. You have all of these needs, and not one of these needs necessarily dominates. They can dominate at different times, but that can change over time. It can change in context in different situations. So it's not as it's not as structured maybe as McClelland's theory of needs. So the key insights with this particular theory are that there are multiple needs that can be activated simultaneously. So in this theory, and I would assume for most people, if you kind of think about even your own life, you have a little bit of all of these needs, even for your job. Like I need the money I make from my job for my existence, but I also really value relationships with students, relationships with my colleagues, relationships with my supervisor. And then I picked the profession I'm in because I have a lot of growth needs. I'm really curious about the world. I love doing research to find out answers to really interesting questions. I love learning new things. That's why I like teaching because I'm always learning stuff. So we have these, and even in your own life, you can think there's not one that always dominates. I have all three of these at the same time. But you can get frustrated at higher levels. Because, for example, when you're in a job, say you're in your job for several years, people will assume you don't really have existence or even relatedness needs. Those are already being met. So there's often a focus on those growth needs. But this means that you lose focus on the lower needs. In the compensation and rewards context, what this can mean is sometimes supervisors think so much about those growth needs. And instead of thinking about, oh, maybe my employees would like raises or bonuses, they think less about the money. They think more like, oh, my employees just want challenging assignments. But I think, and maybe you'll find this out in your interview project, a lot of employees would also like those raises. Like those existence needs, for example, don't just go away because you've been in your career for some time. You still want increases in your pay because you have other goals potentially in life that you want to fulfill in terms of your existence needs that maybe you weren't able to do before, or just for recognition that those needs still exist and that your job can help fulfill them. So criticisms with this theory, it can be difficult to predict how individuals will respond to unmet needs because in this theory, it's even more difficult than McClelland's theory of needs because there's not necessarily one need that dominates. So it makes it just difficult even for supervisors to determine what might motivate this employee if all three of these needs are always existing, but maybe at potentially different levels in different contexts at any one time. And then multiple needs can be challenging for just managers to deal with generally because you have all of these employees who have all of these needs and they may or may not be straightforward about what they need because a lot of these needs may also be unconscious. We can't tell someone that right now, I really have a need for a challenging work assignment. Like we may not know that. And so it can be really difficult for managers to figure out how to dole out work to employees or how to make sure that employees are staying motivated. The Hertzberg two-factor theory actually comes before the McClelland and the ERG theory. I don't know why this book shows it later, other than those theories are related to Maslow's, one of them is related to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but they kind of look like each other. That's my theory. I don't really know. Again, if any of you have ever taken my organizational behavior class, you've seen this theory before. Hertzberg's two-factor theory says that there are two types of factors that people have, and he really focused on the workplace for this theory. So this isn't always a general theory about everything else. These other theories were in psychology, were developed for kind of life needs, life motivations. This one specifically for work. So on the left here on this graphic that I found online, there are hygiene factors, and hygiene factors are factors that have to, some minimal standard has to be met for employees to be satisfied at work, but they don't necessarily motivate employees the more you give them. So if they're not there, employees will not be motivated or be demotivated, but if they are there, it doesn't necessarily motivate them more. So things like your salary, which can be kind of surprising to people, this is a hygiene factor. The conditions in which you work, policies that you have to work under, your supervision, or relationships. One way to remember or think about hygiene factors is if you've thought about a work situation or a situation in a student organization or volunteering where one of these factors wasn't good for you, maybe you had a terrible supervisor, you can think about how it kind of made your job lousy. That's what a hygiene factor does. When it's missing, it makes your job not very motivating, but when it's there, it's really like a nice to have, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be more motivated, according to this theory. Motivating factors on the right in the purple, they do motivate employees. So there's not necessarily a minimal standard that you have to have, but the more of it you do have, the more motivated theoretically employees will be. So these are things like achievement. So recognizing someone did a good job in whatever way that is. If a supervisor is telling you that versus like you get a bonus in your compensation. having interesting work to do, having some responsibility for either process, a service, or other people. And then advancement, having opportunities to work up in the organization and to take on more challenging tasks and more responsibility. The key insight here is that removing dissatisfaction or kind of dealing with those hygiene factors doesn't necessarily create satisfaction at work. You often need those motivating factors to make people satisfied with their jobs. But as you can probably already tell from my hints, there are lots of criticisms about this theory. It may not be very generalizable to the entire workforce. For example, if you work in a factory, the conditions might actually be something that can be motivating for you because you may have an expectation that you'll work on a machine with other people on the line doing the same job over and over. But if I know a few years ago, for example, our SHRM chapter went to an Amazon warehouse. In some of their warehouses, they now have robots that do a lot of that work. So the kind of work that people who worked in factories did before, now it's changed. So now that they're managing robots, they're probably working with AI at this point as well. That could actually be a motivating factor. That's really interesting work. Those are new skills that people are learning. And so this may not be very generalizable for all kinds of jobs. It also excludes a lot of context, like economic conditions, where if you're worried about losing your job, or if the job market's really tight where it's going to be hard for you to find another job, your salary or your supervision or relationships, the things that keep you at work and help you understand that you might be safe in the job that you have, that actually might be very motivating for you instead of just a hygiene factor in that particular context.